Welcome to Humans of Diplomacy. Today I'm in Geneva with Michael Møller, who spent over 4 decades at the United Nations, working across some of the world's most complex political and humanitarian contexts, from Iran, Cyprus, and Haiti, and to New York and Geneva. Michael served as the Director General of the United Nations office in Geneva, and he was also the Executive Director of the Kofi Annan Foundation. In this conversation, we will talk about the realities of senior international civil service and how multilateralism is evolving in today's world. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Michael, I wanted to start by asking you why you wanted to work in diplomacy and international affairs. Was there a moment in your experience or in your early life or early career that shaped that decision?
Well, my dad was a diplomat, so it is kind of genetic. And in fact, when I was 18 and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what I really wanted to do was to become a film director. And then I thought a little bit about it, and I realized that at that time, the chances of a Dane becoming a world-famous film director were really small. So I dropped that idea, and I ended up doing international relations. That's how I got there. I got where I am now.
Okay, and anything in particular that incentivized you? Is it mostly your dad?
No. It was I liked that life, and I grew up in it. It was a very international life. We lived all over the place. I was very interested in international affairs, and it was a very natural thing for me to do.
You started as a JPO, as a
Yes.
junior program officer or professional officer
Yes, I started at the very bottom of the ladder,
at UNHCR.
UNHCR, P1, step 1.
And was there something that surprised you? You grew up in that environment, in that world, but still, was there anything that surprised you when you started? Do you remember that?
Well, I was on my way to becoming a Danish diplomat. And then the foreign ministry called me and said, look, there's this job in Geneva that we think you might want and you might be good at. So why don't you go down and get yourself interviewed, which I did and got the job. So I was not particularly prepared. I mean, the idea of working for the UN was obviously an attractive one because we all thought that the UN at that time was the greatest thing on earth. But what surprised me was the absolutely extraordinary experience of working with refugees on the ground and the personal satisfaction that one gets out of, in fact, saving people's lives through what we do, and really being part of something that helps and changes the conditions of quite a lot of people who, for no fault of their own, are in really deep difficulty. So I was, in a sense, I was surprised maybe by how much I liked it.
Okay, great. And was there something already then that you thought the people outside of the system don't get really well about the UN in particular?
Yes. It didn't hit me in the beginning because I was lucky in a sense because I arrived at UNHCR 3 months before UNHCR turned into a supermarket from being a little family business. A lot of refugees all of a sudden were thrown that way, Afghanistan, Horn of Africa, the boat people in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So millions and millions of refugees out of the blue that they had to deal with. So I was a young fellow. I had been there for 3 months, and suddenly I got thrown into jobs that I would never have gotten in under normal circumstances. So I learned a lot very fast, and that was exciting, and I loved it. But after a while, I understood that and this is something that was only reinforced over the past 40 years, that the UN has been appallingly bad at telling its story, has really not been good at it. And it's not rocket science. I mean, really, what needs to be done is to explain to the individual person on this planet why the UN is good for him or her in their lives. And that's possible. But that was not done. It was all very bureaucratic. So I spent most of my career trying to do the opposite and explaining to people and showing them why it was good. And also for my own sake, in the sense that it was a lot easier to do the different jobs that I had if people understood why I was there. And that would, whether it was peacekeeping, whether it was humanitarian affairs, whether it was political, it was very much part of the central part of the narrative that had to be shared with people that you dealt with. So yes, that was not at the very beginning, because it was exciting. It was fantastic to be thrown into the thick of things. And I realized very quickly that if you did want to work for the UN, then starting to work for UNHCR and being placed in the field was probably one of the better ways to do it, because you learned very quickly the complexities of international affairs.
Sure. So you just said that the UN is very bad at explaining what they do to the general public and to outsiders. Can you help us figure that out and understand that a little bit better? Maybe when you were Director General at the Geneva office of the UN office in Geneva, what was it looking like? What is it that you did or you achieved? What did it look like for people?
Actually, we did quite a lot. I did quite a lot, but not alone. I did it with people. One of the things and that is a parallel reality, if you want, is that people in Switzerland, people in Geneva, really don't have much of a clue what the UN is about. And particularly in Geneva, they look to this huge building in the middle of the city, and they don't quite understand. They think it's some sort of silver tower that they're not, and they can't get into. And of course, that was wrong. I mean, the host country needs to know, and the citizens of the host country need to be involved and need to know what's happening. So we did quite a lot of things. First of all, I, together with the Fondation pour Genève, which is specifically created by Yvan Pictet, the banker, many years ago, to help international Geneva and to help people understand. We talked about it, and so he went out and bought a bus. And we turned the bus into a museum about what the UN does. And he got one of the, I can't remember the name of it, but one of the sort of very famous cartoonists to paint inside the bus what a day in the life of a family looked like, from they woke up to they went to bed, and with the names and the explanations of every single UN organizations that did something that had an impact on their lives, whether it was something to do with their food or with their clothes, etc. And then that bus drove around Switzerland for a whole summer in about 50 cities. And I went to several of these cities just to see how this was happening. And I stood outside the bus while people came out. And in every single city, the people who came out said exactly the same thing. I didn't know. So after that, they did know. I did open doors. We did the first open door.
At the Palais?
At the Palais, yes. A little bit at the consternation of some of my colleagues, especially the security guys. But we did it, and it happened to be a very nice, sunny Saturday afternoon, and we had 20,000 people walk into the garden. And they loved it. But because the thirst of understanding what was happening. And then I threw parties in town for the younger people of the city and invited also the young colleagues in the UN system. And about 1,000 young people showed up every time we had a party downtown in one of the bars. And the wine producers came and gave us wine, and we had a jazz band, and we had the mayor came and we spoke. And it was a lot of the young people from Geneva brought their CVs in case they might.
So networking.
It was a huge networking thing. Super successful, and very, very nice. It was a nice feeling to it. And I talked a lot. I mean, I would. People would stop me in the bus and ask me and talk to me, and so a lot of engagements with the local politicians. For example, we had to start the proceedings for the renovation of the Palais and the building of a new building. Very expensive initiative. And Switzerland was going to give us a loan for half of it, over 400 million Swiss francs. But it has to be approved by 3 parliaments, the city, the canton, and the federal. So I started inviting the politicians from Bern, to come and see what happened and what to do and why we're doing it. And there was a lot of work and a lot of interaction and outreach. And the happy result of that was that all 3 parliaments voted unanimously for the loan, which was incredibly not happening, that all three parliaments on the same subject voted unanimously. So I was very, very happy about that. So that, it just proves that the outreach effort and the simple messaging about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it, and why it's important that they pay attention and that they support what the system is doing, because it has something to do with their own lives. Worked.
So you spoke about, yes, International Geneva. How do you see what's going on now? We know that the UN is massively or partly leaving Geneva to relocate in other cheaper duty stations. What's your opinion on that?
First of all, I'm not so sure that the places they're relocating to are much cheaper than Geneva. That's one element. It was supposed to be, but I don't think so. Now, in the world as it is today, fragmented, geopolitically, exploded, it's incredibly important for the world to have a place like Geneva, a neutral city where everybody can come, discuss their agendas without other agendas cutting across them, where the structure is made for that. Geneva is a city that has evolved as the place for peace talks, for negotiations, and for finding solutions to difficult problems. So that need is even stronger now than it was before. So I think that International Geneva, it's a little bit too early to sort of write the obituary of International Geneva. It will continue, it will revive. We've been in these kinds of situations before. It's cyclical. The cycle may be a little longer this time because the problems are much bigger and much more integrated. At least we understand the integration and the interrelations with them. But International Geneva will continue and will pursue. Some organizations are going to close, and they should. In all of this, there's a very clear need and understanding that the international system, the multilateral system with the UN at its heart, has to be reformed, and it has to be reformed very significantly.
Yes.
So that is a given, and that will happen, and it will happen naturally, and that's the way history moves. We'll get other organizations that will be created. A lot of stuff is going to happen in the next decades. Technology is going to change our lives dramatically, all of us, including structures and the way we work and the way we interact. So lots of stuff is happening, and it's all quite exciting, actually. But then it's fun to be part of trying to shape it.
Great. So you were you had like so many different roles over the years, and in very different duty stations and thematic issues. What are the ones that stood out for you? And do you feel like there are common elements that you needed to thrive in a job or to really appreciate what you were doing?
Well, I need a challenge.
Okay.
But most of these jobs were challenges by definition. I was not going to accept to sit in some sort of backyard bureaucratic job that nothing happened and nobody paid any attention to you. So the jobs that I went for and the jobs that I looked for were a mixture of field operations.
So impact. Also.
Impact, yes. But also headquarters. I mean, very, very consciously. And I moved back and forth because I understood that if you wanted to make a career in the system, you needed to do both, and you needed to understand. It's like a staircase. You have to take different kinds of stairs up. So that's what I did. I spent a lot of time in New York. I spent a lot of time in Geneva. I spent a lot of time in the field. And all of it really quite enriching, but also very much over the years understanding the interconnectedness amongst all these jobs and the integration of these jobs, and that the UN and what it does is not cannot be seen, although many people do, in silos.
Mm-hmm.
And this is certainly something that needs to change now.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about reform, we have to completely de-silo the system if it's at all possible. So there was, it was also important not to do the same thing all the time. I mean, I loved the fact that I started working with the refugees, and I did so for several years. But then I moved on, and I did stuff in the Secretariat in New York, and then I did stuff in Geneva, and then back, So there was a kind of a natural progression, if you want, that went with also the fact that I would get promoted, and so with higher grades, you got more and different kinds of responsibilities. So to me, it has been a nice river
Great.
that I have swam down.
So you said you like a challenge. What is the biggest challenge that you had to face? If you could, I'm sure there are many, but if you could name one that
Yeah,
really stood
well,
out.
I was sent to a number of wartime places. But the challenge, of course, was how to deal with refugees, how to make sure that they got the help they needed, particularly in countries where it was not an immediate reflex either by the government or the people there to help these poor people. But so that was something that needed to be worked on. I was in Haiti, where the situation was pretty tough at times, and where we had to reinstate a president that had been thrown out. And when I arrived, there were dead bodies in the street and stuff like that. It was rather unpleasant.
To say the least.
I was in Iran during the war between Iran and Iraq, and spent most of my nights outside because the bombs were falling, and I started smoking again there because of that after many years of not having done so. But at the same time, it was incredibly exciting. I mean, to be part of we were a presence that had been agreed upon between the Iraqis and or rather the Secretary General at that time placed two teams in Iraq and Iran to try and help and to ensure that neither of them would attack civilian populations and civilian targets. And when they did, we would go and make an investigation and report to the Security Council and stuff like that. So that was an interesting, fairly challenging, but at the same time, really, really quite nice. I love the caviar.
Well, I don't know if that's what it's known for, but especially now. But yeah. Are these challenging times also the ones where you thought that your work really mattered?
Yes, of course.
Yes. It was clearly associated.
Yes, no, clearly. But I always, not that my work mattered, but the work we were doing and the team was doing and that the UN was doing, that it mattered, absolutely.
You speak about the team. What kind of leader are you? What is it to be a leader in this kind of environment?
Well, it's several things. It's one who listens. It's one who has empathy. It's one who takes decisions. Once you've listened and you've taken the opinion of those around you, then you take a decision and you make it stick and you go with it. I had a policy that evolved over the years. But once, for example, when I joined the Geneva office and became the Director General there, I decided that my policy was going to be a very simple one, which was that I would do what I thought was right and then ask for forgiveness later in case of need. And that worked really well.
Is it what you have to do in a bureaucracy?
Exactly. But also it's much easier to do in a bureaucracy because,
the accountability is very...
that doesn't quite exist, and it takes, you have to really do something really, really bad before they start taking you to account. So that works well, and also because by then I knew exactly what needed to be done. Certainly in Geneva, I'd been there before. I'd worked in that office before, and I saw the possibilities and the opportunities of what could be done in order to change also the understanding and the impact of what a huge office like UN Geneva could do. And so there was, we started all sorts of initiatives that were very successful. And that made an impact. So I'm happy about those things.
What are the initiatives that you started under this philosophy or principle?
Well, for example, I was there when the SDGs were invented by all member states, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I was seeing them, a lot of enthusiasm, and everybody sort of trying to implement them all over the map. Nobody talking to each other, no coordination, no integration of efforts, a lot of duplication. And that didn't make any sense. So I created something called the SDG Lab, and the lab was designed.
It's still there, no?
Yeah. And this lab was designed to do precisely that, to sort of federate all of these efforts, to put them together to make sure that we instead of duplication, we had collaboration and reinforced to a large extent the impact of both the individual efforts but also the collective efforts. And it became, I think that effort, which became quite successful, also helped the system itself understand that, in fact, it was much better to work together than working alone. The impact of your efforts, both individual and collective efforts, much bigger if you work in a collaborative way.
So that was also a big part of your role as the Director General of,
Yes.
Of the UN office in Geneva. Why is it you think that the colleagues at the United Nations and across different UN entities are so reluctant to collaborate or work together?
It's a human thing, I mean, it's not that they're against collaboration. They hate being coordinated. And that's just anathema for everybody. No coordination, although everybody talks about coordination and the need for coordination. The General Assembly talks about it, and the Security Council, everybody. But people don't like to be coordinated. They have no problem collaborating because it allows them to maintain their identity as an organization and maybe also as a head of it or as working there. And it was always a challenge. But the fact is that in today's world, as it is, unless we find ways of working a lot better together, of integrating our efforts, of networking, we're simply not going to make it. And it's, you can see it in small, you make me think of it now, but one of the things that I try to change. So you have, I don't know how many organizations in Geneva, UN organizations, maybe 40, 43, I don't know. Every single one of them has a different pass to enter their buildings. Okay? Doesn't make any sense. We should have had one pass for all of them. Every single one of these organizations has a different computer system. And these computer systems don't talk to each other. Also doesn't make any sense, etc. I mean, these kinds of things that are part of this silo structure that we have had ever since the UN was created. And one has to remember that was created in the image of the member states who created us, who also worked in silos, ministries that didn't talk to each other, etc. And that has been a big problem. It has really made the system itself as a whole much less effective and much less impactful than it could have been. It's been incredibly impactful. I mean, if you look at the last 80 years, the UN has and the humanity has given itself a level of peace and rights and a well-being that we've never had before in history. But it could have been a lot better.
Don't you think that it's also because not collaborating is what is rewarded individually?
In some cases.
In some cases.
Yeah, but I mean that is, and it's not rewarded by the sort of more stupid part of the staff of different organizations. The sort of more enlightened leadership, of course, see it, but it has been a break on throughout the system.
But also the competition for money and things like
that.
Of
course,
that makes it
clearly. But again, here, I mean, one of the things that they're beginning to understand is that we need to go and look for money collectively, and not be trying to outbid each other, which makes no sense either. So there's lots of stuff that needs to be changed, but it's possible.
Before we get there, was there like an encounter that you had during your career that like really stayed with you?
Oh, yes.
Really meaningful? Do you have an example for us?
Well, one of my bosses was Kofi Annan.
Okay. Lucky you.
Yeah. And he was a very important element in my life because I learned extraordinary amounts from him, just being around him, and somebody I miss every day. But there are, so that was, I would say, one of the, Mandela was another, of course.
So you met with
I worked on anti-apartheid issues for a while.
Yes, in New York, right?
In New York, yes, but also in South Africa. I think I was the first UN staff that was allowed formally and officially into South Africa after they did away with apartheid. So I worked a lot on that, and it was really quite interesting, and also because we got results and we actually helped the end of apartheid. And we worked a lot on sanctions. I mean, all of the tools that we had to try and push apartheid out of the way. And Desmond Tutu, there were extraordinary people. And then extraordinary people that are not famous, but some of the people that I met, some of the people who were refugees and who took their own destiny in their hands. I'll give you an example. I was a desk officer very early on, at the very beginning, for Malaysia and for that part of the world.
At the Department for Political Affairs?
No, in the UNHCR.
Oh, UNHCR,
I mean,
sorry.
I was
sorry.
still,
Yeah, okay.
you know, and I was really young. It was one of the first jobs I got. And then we suddenly realized that we had 70,000 refugees or people on a small 2 square kilometer island off the coast of Malaysia, which have been placed there by pirates, who had, in many cases, taken their women and then just plonked their families on this island. It was pretty dramatic. It was called Pulau Bidong. Look it up.
Okay.
Anyway, so no water, no food, no shelter, nothing. And a lot of people on this island. It was a rock. And I was a desk officer with absolutely no clue what to do, except I had a little bit of common sense.
Which helps.
So the first thing was, of course, to get water. And I got them water within a week, a system of water distribution. And then they needed to get shelter. So we provided them with timber and stuff. And it was the first time in refugee history that the refugees themselves built in several floors because there was no space. So they built high rises, if you want. And one of the things, these were Vietnamese refugees. One of the things that really I found extraordinary is that within a month, remember, we are on a small island with nothing around, 4 hours of sailing to get there. And somehow these guys figure out a way of creating a market. Food. They had fresh eggs, they had Coca-Cola, they had all sorts of stuff. I mean, I have no ideas today how they managed to do it. But the human ingenuity is something that always struck me, particularly with the Vietnamese refugees in many different settings. Quite incredible. And also the way that they took care of the families, and they really, it was a not just a family effort, but it was a communal effort that was amazing to watch. I like that.
That's impressive. Impressive.
It was cool.
So during your 4 years in the UN, more or less, were there moments where you felt discouraged?
Of course.
Many?
No.
Okay. Do you remember when?
Yeah, there was one time I was in New York in the Department of Political Affairs, and I was getting a little fed up. And then I remembered my earliest desire to become a film director. So I decided I was going to take a break and go to film school. And started the proceedings, and I actually got accepted in the film school in Copenhagen, I think. And then things passed, and I got over
Yourself.
myself, yes. And then I stayed. But it
Why?
was
What was the trigger?
What was
The trigger for your decision to move out? Was there something in particular, or was it
I was just fed up.
the bureaucracy?
Yes, and I was in a big bureaucracy in New York at the headquarters, and it was a kind of a routine that had set in. I was at that time the chief of staff of the head of the political department, so it was a lot of administrative work and management and things. I guess somewhere in there I got a little fed up, and there was not enough action and not enough interesting stuff. Although, of course, there was a lot of interesting stuff. But anyway, it was one of those human moments that it was time to do something else. And then I can't remember what happened after that, but I think that anyway, I carried on with the work, and then I got moved somewhere else.
And do you ever regret the fact that you didn't go to film school?
No.
No, okay.
I mean, it would have been fun, but I'll do that next life.
So was your plan to do like documentaries or fiction movies?
Fiction.
Fiction movie?
Yeah. I was very into movies when I was at school and university. I ran the film school, the film club.
It's cool.
I did a couple of movies, so I would go to the cinema at least 3 times a week. But the funny thing, and I don't know if that's human as well, if it's just me, but the day I decided I was no longer going to be a director, I was 18 or 19 at the time, and that I was going to go and study international relations.
You stopped going to the movies?
Yeah, for at least 3 years before I set foot into a movie house.
I think it's a human thing.
I guess.
Probably.
I guess, yeah.
Was there a political or geopolitical moment that particularly affected you, personally or professionally? I mean, you've seen a lot. You were talking about the Iran-Iraq war. You're talking about Haiti, but was there one moment, politically or geopolitically, that really affected you? That got to you?
There were small ones, not big ones. I mean, one of the things that you have to learn when you are in that business is to put your politics behind you, hide
Personal
it. Personal
opinions.
politics, yeah. At least in your professional outreach and discussion, and not let it color whatever you say and whatever you do in operational terms, particularly when we're talking about refugees, which is, of course, a delicate issue. But there were, of course, geopolitical impact of what was happening happened all the time, and I saw a lot of the things that I saw in the General Assembly, for example, didn't make much sense, but was it was because the geopolitical situation was such that people couldn't get their act together and couldn't agree. So a lot of the stuff that actually needed to be done wasn't done. But then it also showed the possibility of actually doing stuff. For example, on the SDGs, when the first batch was passed, there was a lot of opposition in some countries, including some very big countries.
But on the rights-based agenda amongst all?
No, just the Sustainable Development Goals as such, as a development tool. And it was something that the Secretary General was pushing very hard, and rightly so. But it took a lot of massaging and a lot of negotiation and a lot of smart diplomacy by the Secretary General, by the Deputy Secretary General, by others, other senior officials, and finally we got it through. And even those countries who were opposed to them voted for them. So you saw the system in action and how it could do good by some really concerted and smart movements.
That consensus that you just described doesn't no longer exist, right? Around the SDGs and other international global agendas.
Well, no, it doesn't right now. A lot of it, the SDGs took a big hit because of COVID. And the implementation of them was put aside because simply people had other things to do. Today's world, development, human rights, and all these things are 4-letter words, unfortunately, but that we'll come back to it. The SDGs themselves are really an extraordinary tool. The fact that all these countries, every single country signed them, I don't think they really understood how good a job they'd done on these 17 goals. And they remain it's fairly simple to describe their importance. If you manage to implement all 17 goals in a country, then you will have peace in that country. It's as simple as that. And a lot of people don't quite get that, but
because as you said, everything is related, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Was there a moment where you had to do something that you were not fully comfortable with?
Rarely. Yeah, I'm not. There were times when I was pushed or told to do things which I refused because I didn't believe that they were the right things to do. And it happened at some point. It affected my
career advancement.
Yeah, it did for a while, but then I caught up. But if there's one thing I learned is that you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror in the morning when you wake up, and if you don't like what you see, then you have a problem.
Would you be comfortable telling us what would the things that you refused to do and got you?
Well, it happened a couple of times, but one of the first times when I really decided to push back was when I was asked to go and work with a person in an African country who I knew to be corrupt.
Okay.
And I said, I'm not going there. I don't mind going wherever you want me. I'm not going to work with that person because he is not only corrupt, but he's criminally corrupt.
Oh, wow, okay.
And that drew a lot of ire, particularly from the African colleagues in the system who didn't like me, pointing a finger at one of their colleagues or one of them. And, but that's the way it was.
Okay.
So I
It's a very clear.
I moved. I had to move somewhere else, and that was fine. I made up for it later.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So now looking forward to the future of the multilateral system, you gave very concrete proposals on how, if I may, very interesting proposals on how the UN system might reform itself. Do you think there is a chance that that happens? Do you think there will be a United Nations in 10 years or 20 years?
Yes, I think so. Not necessarily the United Nations of today,
Okay.
but a United Nations. Different, I hope, more effective, more integrated, de-siloed, and more networked, but definitely one that works together in ways that we have never seen before. And that's where the shoe hurts, in a way. That's what needs to be worked on. Now, I believe that we are in a situation right now, as I said earlier, that unless we find ways to work together, really like we've never done before, we are simply not going to make it. And when I say we, I mean humanity is not going to make it. And it's not for tomorrow, but over the next decades. So the reality usually presses itself on us sooner rather than later. And the reality is that, what I just described. And that reality will push us back into a much different and much more effective multilateral system with a UN that is more effective and more integrated. And probably pared down, but more effective in the sense that it will also be more effective, not just in the implementation, but also in the use of the money that is scarce right now, and in less bureaucratic, less repeating mistakes. If there's one thing that UN is good at, is
not learning?
Not learning from its past mistakes. It's quite extraordinary, actually. I remember sitting in. I was very young then. I was a young staff member, and I was sitting in a meeting with 10 police commissioners from 10 peacekeeping missions. And after 5 minutes, they realized that they had done the same mistake 10 times. And I sat there and I said, how can that be? I mean, don't these people talk to each other? Isn't there somebody who sort of draws conclusions from away certain things? But obviously not. And that stayed with me. That
They probably did, but nobody read it. Or it was not shared with anyone.
Well, whatever the reason, the fact is that they themselves realized that,
Yes.
and were a little surprised. And I was very surprised because I was just still very young in my UN career. But it stuck with me, and it's something that I always remember because I always make sure that to share, and I always did make sure to share the information with the people that needed to know.
What will it take for the UN to reform itself in the way that you? I heard you say recently that the reform needs to be really deep and cannot be just about relocation and cutting staff and relocating the money. But what would it take for the United Nations to take that route that you're suggesting? And
well, it'll
work
take several things. The United Nations. One thing we have to understand is that if you ask governments to reform the UN, it's not going to happen. If you ask the UN to reform itself, it's not going to happen. You have to have a very different kind of decision-making table around which you sit, the governments, the UN, civil society, business community, the science, young people, and everybody and his brother, in order to really have a very different kind of conversation that reflects the integrated nature of our world and the integrated understanding we have now. We know that the problems are complex, and we also know that we need to find complex solutions for them. What we don't have is a kind of will, enough of the will to actually make that happen. And it's not rocket science. I mean, it's since we know exactly what needs to be done, we just need to do it. And what needs to be done is several things. First of all, we need to reform. If you want to start at the top, we need to reform the Security Council. Now, the countries and the member states have tried to reform the Security Council for the past 60 years, 60 years, with not much success. They have added a few member states here and there, and a couple of vetoes. But basically, you now have a Security Council that is completely dysfunctional and is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is to be the guardian of peace and security on the planet. So that has to change. And then you have to de-silo the system. You actually have to build something that, and it sounds a little technical, but I think you have to build something that is a matrix management system and structure, which means that when a country needs help, you're not going to ask 5 or 6 different organizations to do something independently. You're going to have one structure that will help them with an integrated package of solutions to what they need in order to get them to where they need to go. So it's a very different kind of very different kind of structure. It means that we have to break down all these different organizations and come up with something that is substantially much more integrated.
So does it mean we start with the UN and then reform it, or we start from the needs and we build something else?
Both. I don't think we have. You see, one of the things that we need to do is to make sure we have accumulated extraordinary amounts of experience and expertise. A lot of it good, and a lot of it really. 80 years of. So we can't just throw that out. In other words, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So you have to retain what is good, and you have to throw out what is not good. You have to create some new organizations or parts of a new organization, rather. Otherwise, I was about to contradict myself. So that we come up with something that works very, very differently. It's going to take some time. It's going to be really hard to do. Also because most of the people who work in these structures are going to be dead set against it. A lot of the governments are not particularly keen on having to deal with the reform that is going to be probably expensive, but very necessary. So there's lots of, one of the problems we have that goes against this is that our political structures are short-term. The solutions that we need to deal with and find solutions for are long-term. And those two things don't go well together, unfortunately. So we have to find, and this is why we have to have this table that is with many more different people around it, where you get impetus and you get expertise and push from parts of society that is not politicized, and sometimes it will be politicians, sometimes it will be somebody else. In order to do that, you obviously need some very strong leadership. And we need, first of all, to have a very strong Secretary General, whether it's a woman or a man, to do so with a real clout and real push and with understanding of what a real reform of the system means. There's one thing that I keep saying, during COVID and right after COVID, there was one slogan that people kept banding around, which said, "Build back better." That is out of the question. We are not going to build back better. We're going to build forward better. Building back better is not just going to give us the same crap that we're living in right now. And so it's a tall order, but I think it's possible. I think it's not just a question of it being possible. It's absolutely necessary for our survival. We have to come up with a system that is much more integrated and that will really do the job of coming up with a solution. Our existential problems that we're facing right now are so big and so life-threatening that, and we are way behind the curve right now, whether it's climate, whether it's health, whether it's, you name it. When you add to that the advent of new technologies, and I'm not just talking about artificial intelligence like everybody else is talking right now, but we're talking about quantum, we're talking about neurosciences, we're talking about all sorts of stuff that is happening already and that will change our lives incredibly. I mean, really incredibly. Most of us don't understand how much. I don't understand how much, because it's a work in progress. But the fact is that these technologies are going to give us tools to do a lot of the stuff that we want to do. But it's also a big risk, because if we don't get a grip on these technologies, we'll end up with something that is
out of control.
That is really going to do a lot of bad. And we're seeing it already now. If you look at what the big technology companies are doing, and trying to maintain the control of how these technologies are going to be used and what kind of the rules that we're going to set for their development and for their use, we have a problem. And I hope we'll figure out a way of dealing with it.
So earlier in this conversation, Michael, you mentioned Kofi Annan as being a mentor to you. I don't
Also,
know if
yes,
that's
very much so, yes.
that's a word that
But
you
he
would
was my
use.
boss.
Yes.
But very much a mentor, yes.
So, looking forward to the next Secretary General of the United Nations and the challenges that you just described, what are the qualities that you think the next Secretary General must have to take the United Nations through both the reform that it has to embrace and also to embrace these new challenges that we have ahead of us?
Let me just start by saying something that is also true very much, and which is an impediment to moving forward.
Yes.
You know, when most people talk about the future, basically they're talking about a slight change to their present. This business of looking into a box that says the future without bringing all your baggage from your life and from your past is very, very hard for most people. It takes a lot of effort to really step out of that box. So, and as I said, our future is going to be very different from what we think. First of all, for most people think they want as a future, and certainly if they have a little bit of imagination or what kind of future they think we'll get, neither of these are even close to what we are actually going to get. So you need a leader. I'll come back to your question about the sector. You need a leader who has a very clear vision of what the future might be, or what it takes to harness the system and to reform the system in such a way that for the next 20, 30, 40 years, we are going to come with a structure that is actually going to help ensure that humanity has a grip on that future and that we are in control of it, and that we make sure that our kids are prepared for dealing with that future, and that the structures are adequate to actually move all that expertise and all that knowledge that we have in a way that is going to benefit humanity and not just be an obstacle. So it's a tall order. I think it's going to be interesting to see if we can find such a person. I think it probably has to be somebody slightly younger than most candidates right now, also simply because it's a mindset issue.
Also because 2 terms is a long time, and
Yeah.
it's a 10 year.
Well, I would rather that we have a 1 7-year term than 2 5-year terms. And a lot of people talk about that, and I don't know if we'll ever get that, but I think that would be much better. Also, in terms of mindset, you have a 1 7-year term, then you do what you have to do, and then you're out of there. So a person who is one of the big problems that we've had, and that is changing, which is really interesting right now, is that the West has been kind of dictating the norms and the rules and the values that the world has functioned by. That cannot continue, and it isn't continuing, because we are seeing one of the interesting things of what we're seeing right now is a lot of countries, and particularly the mid-sized countries, are taking on responsibility for their own destiny, and they are making quite clear what they need and what their countries need, and they're going to act accordingly. So there's a very geopolitical change that is also positive. But you have to have a person who understands that, and who understands that there is going to be a Western alliance, there's going to be an African alliance, there's all sorts of different groups, and be somebody who can actually make these different groups work together in a way that benefits humanity. So I don't really care which region that person is from. That's not, in today's world, not the predominant thing. It really is a matter of the kind of education that person has had, the kind of experience that person has had in coming to the job, and the kind of empathy, understanding, listening ability, and with somebody who has a very clear voice and who is able to explain in clear and simple terms to people around the world what needs to be done and why the UN is a good tool to have these things done.
You said no matter the region doesn't matter. Does the gender of the person matter?
Yes, of course. But I'm I'm the wrong person to ask that, because I'm completely gender neutral in my approaches. I have pushed very much for making sure that women are part of the way we run the world. It makes no sense. There's absolutely no logic in thinking that you can run the world with only half of the population. So yes, and I think that there has to be a rotation. I think I would be very happy if the next Secretary General is a woman, but with the kind of attributes that I mentioned before.
Course. Michael, thank you very much for your time and this really fascinating conversation. I really thank you.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching Humans of Diplomacy. And for more behind-the-scene insights and lessons from this conversation, you can join the newsletter. The link is in the description. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share with others interested in international affairs. See you soon.